So, in honor of Disney's valiant effort to cancel genders in America, I'm now going to be addressing you as ladies and gentlemen. And if you don't identify as a lady or a gentleman, then maybe this isn't the right show for you, or maybe you'll stick around and you'll change your mind. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holthouse, coming to you live from the countryside of Ohio. This is going to be an important episode. So, in response to extreme sanctions, Putin is fighting back where it hurts the most: food, energy, and currency. And not only have Putin's actions accelerated the global food crisis, but many experts are saying that he's putting the final nail in the coffin of the dollar. If that's true, when will the collapse happen? What does this mean for our way of life? And how can Americans protect their savings and prepare for the future? Before we get into the show, I have a few quick messages for you. First off, if you're not following me yet online on social media, head over to Telegram or Truth Social. I'm most active on those two places. Just search for Man in America. All of the other social profiles are in the description below the video, whether you want to find me on Gab or Twitter, which may be changing soon with Mr. Musk coming in, or any others. Or you can also find links to where you can listen to my podcast, because every show gets uploaded as a podcast shortly after that. So today's show is brought to you by RiseTV. RiseTV is literally the reason why I can do Man in America full time. With big tech censorship and them demonetizing my channel, they've made it really tough for people like me with a mission to tell the truth. That's how we built RiseTV. Because honestly, right now, folks, we're at war, and it's an information war. And Man in America, it's how I'm fighting. Look, on RiseTV, we have a massive content library. And if you want to join the Q&A at the end of my shows, there is a link for a free trial in the description below. So come try it out. I think you'll end up staying. It's a beautiful community of patriots. I think you're going to love it. And as you'll see in today's show, I believe we have some very shaky times ahead of us. And a lot of folks are looking for ways to protect their wealth. And I've always been one to recommend physical gold and silver. In the past year, a lot of you have asked me if I had any recommendations as to where to buy gold or silver. And I was always hesitant to recommend anyone before because, unfortunately, there's a lot of shady dealers in the industry. However, after doing a lot of my own research, I'm confident recommending Noble Gold. You can buy gold or silver directly from them, or you can do an IRA transfer. Noble Gold specializes in these IRA transfers, which allow you to transfer your IRA into physical gold and silver with zero taxes or penalties. If you want to learn more about this, open a new tab right now and go to goldwithseth.com. Again, it's goldwithseth.com, or you can call 877-646-5347 to speak to someone in America live right now. Again, it's 877-646-5347. And folks, as you'll see in the show today, I'm going to talk about gold and precious metals. And one thing I'll tell you is, look, I'm not a financial advisor. Do your own research. And it's something I really believe in. I'm very careful recommending anything to you that I don't believe in. And so if you have your own way to purchase gold and silver, there's another company you work with, that's great. I recommend it. Like, I'm not saying only use Noble. That's who I've researched. But as you'll see in today's show, I believe gold and silver is a very safe place for all of us. So we'll talk more about that in the coming hour. All right, folks. There is some incredible stuff happening right now. And look, I know that the news media, their headlines are filled with Hunter Biden laptop and Elon Musk now coming into Twitter, and Hunter Biden laptop is what everyone's talking about. And Durham is reemerging, and Trump is suing Clinton. There's all these things that are happening. And I think that they're important, and I'll probably, cover some of them at a later date. But honestly, I think that what we're seeing right now, and this is even before heading into the war between Russia and Ukraine, if you want to call it a war, or the demilitarization from Putin's perspective, even before heading into that, after 2 years of the pandemic, you can see the entire global landscape is shifting. There's something big happening. And I think for a lot of us, it's easy to see, especially after these past 2 years of the COVID pandemic, that there is a plot unfolding to push humanity into this great reset. Now, when the situation first started emerging over in Ukraine with Putin and everything happening, I was watching it, I was saying, okay, what's happening here? Is it, at first it was the whole narrative, yes, that Putin is clearing out a lot of the Nazis. He's reclaiming parts that are, much more pro-Russia. He's taking down the deep state. There's the biolabs and all that. But what I'm seeing emerging right now is a much, much bigger picture. And so in this show, I'm not going to get into the details of whether Putin's a good guy or a bad guy, or whether Zelensky is good or bad, or a Nazi, or whatever you want to consider. I'm not going to be focusing on the specifics of that because something much larger is happening. So when Putin went in there and did this, as you saw, the entire globalist Western propaganda machine just kicked fully into action. You saw all the I Stand With Ukraine badges on social media, all the donations being accepted, the billions being sent over there. But what's happening? So the West has retaliated not through military force, right? Biden didn't send in 100,000 troops or 10,000 troops to go combat that. What's happening is that the entire West, the central banks, Biden, our American government, they fought back with sanctions. So they fought back saying, look, we're not going to allow you to participate in the SWIFT system, which is massive. That's the global system for transferring money, especially from country to country. They pulled out so many of the big corporations. They basically canceled Putin. In a lot of ways, almost worse than Trump was canceled. They banned any Russian media, such as RT, from all of the different platforms. And we're talking United States, the European Union. This was a major cancellation of Putin. And for a lot of people were saying, oh my goodness, Russia's going to collapse. Russia is on the brink of destruction. What did Putin do? But Putin has taken some very strategic moves with this, which I'm going to talk about today. So for one, is he backed the ruble with gold. And so what you saw happening is as soon as all these sanctions started taking place against them, the value of the ruble rate, which is the currency in Russia, started plummeting. But it's actually already back to its original place. And actually, it's going beyond its original value after Putin packed it with gold. And so what we're going to be talking about today is how Putin's actions, both with gold, the global financial system, the energy, right, with Russia is the largest producer of natural gas, and with food, how they are waging war against these, I'll say, globalist controlled countries, and I say that including the United States of America. Look at Biden sitting in the White House, then going into the European Union, the UN, the typical Europe, the central bankers, et cetera. So Putin is waging war against them, and he's doing it in a brilliant way. And if you watched my shows a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking, oh my goodness, well, Putin may have stepped into a trap. And now that they have Ukraine, they're kicking off their Great Reset even further with universal basic income. It's obviously perpetuating the global food crisis very quickly. That you see that accelerating extremely fast. And I thought, well, Putin got pulled into this, which allowed them to then kick off their Great Reset so much faster. But what I'm also seeing now is something different playing out, where Putin, because of the resources he's in control of, is actually waging a war against them in a very significant way. And I think that what's happening is that I believe we'll call it the deep state or the social engineers, whatever you want to call them, these corrupt creatures, their goal was to collapse our global financial system. But they wanted to do it in a way that it was a controlled demolition. They wanted to have control of that collapse at every step. And so what it looks like is that through Putin's actions, not only is he harming these countries directly, such as Germany, the United States, a lot of the other European countries, but he's also unraveling their global financial system. So I'm going to start with an article from Zero Hedge, which I highly, highly recommend Zero Hedge as a resource for news. They cover a lot of the financial news, but they cover it from a very awakened perspective. I've learned a lot on there, and they don't. It's not like going to see MSNBC Money or even Fox to learn about things. They cover things, as you'll see, with a very, very excellent perspective. So let me pull up this first article I have here from Zero Hedge, which is the global order has cracked. And this is what sets the stage for what I want to talk about today, because there is a massive shift that has happened. So now one thing about Zero Hedge is they will bring in a lot of times content from other websites and publish it on their website where they have a massive audience. So this is originally from a guy named Charles Hugh Smith of the website of2minds.blog. And what he says here is that nations that fail to adapt to the end of financialization and globalization will unravel. Let me pause this video for you. So he says, we all sense the global order has cracked. You'll probably agree. The existing order is breaking down on multiple fronts. Those who have benefited from this arrangement are doing everything in their power to patch the cracks, while those who chafed under the old order's chains seek a new order that suits their interests. The task now is to make sense of this complex inflection point in history. The two statements summarize the transition from the existing global order to the next iteration. Now, I'll make a point here is that the global order that we've been under for so long is really an order that's run by fiat currencies. It's run by the central banking systems. Where they've come in, they've set up central banks all over in different countries around the world, with ours being the Federal Reserve as their main hub for this activity. And that's how they've gained control of these countries. Now, there have been a few leaders that resisted the central banks. They resisted buying into this global fiat currency. These leaders like Gaddafi, for example, or Saddam Hussein, or Putin. So you can see what happens to people that don't play by the central bank rules. So what's important, though, is that there is a transition happening right now. We're going from an old world order into something, you could call it a new world order. It doesn't mean it's their new world order. We're stepping into a new way of our world operating. This is the shift that's happening right now. And this is why it's hard for me to come on here and talk about, Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars, or even Elon Musk, buying his 9.2% share in Twitter. Those are important, but to me, we're entering a shift of every possible way that our society is operating. We're entering into that right now. And to me, there's nothing that eclipses the importance of this, because understanding this also allows you to prepare for it. And that's why this is important. So what the author of this article says is he has 2 points. Finance dominated resources in the old world order. He says now the roles will reverse and real world resources will dominate finance. We can't print our way out of scarcities. And point 2 is reshuffling currencies and credit will not stop the breakdown of the global order's waste is growth landfill economy model. Let me explain what he says here, or let me read what he says and I'll explain a little bit. So he continues, playing financial tricks has extended the life of an unsustainable economic model that glorified growth from wasting resources. By expanding credit money, right, fiat currency, the current global order fueled unsustainable consumption driven by unsustainable speculation. If you stop expanding money and credit, the global order of growth implodes. Unfortunately, for all those who benefited from soaring wealth and income inequality, the trick of expanding money and credit has reached its systemic limits. The dam holding all the toxic debt, leverage, and fraud is finally cracking. So what he's talking about here is that up until now, we've had as he calls it, a finance-dominated resource, meaning it's the central banks that control everything. It's the Fed, which keeps printing money and loaning money to countries around the world. So all these countries are holding U.S. debt. What I'm going to talk about later in the show today is the fact that the Fed has printed 80% of the overall currency in circulation in the past, I think it's a year and a half or so. So they have been ramping up the printing of this fiat currency. So what he's explaining in this article is that it's the printing of this fiat currency that's given them control. But right now, what's happening, and this is what Putin is really kicking off, is a shift into a resource-controlled dominance. Because when you get rid of fiat currency, and you do like what Russia's doing, where you actually have a currency backed by gold, and as you'll see in the steps he's taken, I'll explain in the show, he's also backing his currency through commodities, such as oil. So it's now a resource. It's a resource-dominated currency. This is a big shift. So let me go and open up the next article here, because as I talked about, Russia, Putin, they're waging war via finance, food, and fuel, right? Oil, natural gas, etc. But what Russia is doing with food is significant. So let me pull up this next article. This one is from Breitbart. So The guy in the picture, that's Dmitry Medvedev is his name. Yeah, Dmitry Medvedev. He was he was the former president of Russia, and he's now the current, it's a Russian security official. So what here it says is that the global food crisis, Russia threatens to limit vital agri-supply to friendly countries only. So Russia is controlling resources, and they're using those resources to fight in this war. And this is significant. This will affect us. So Medvedev put out a Telegram post, I think it was on Sunday, that is very revealing of what they're doing. So I'll read this to you. So Medvedev, a senior Russian security official who previously served as the nation's president, has threatened that Russia may soon cut off the West from food exports. A major player in the global market for wheat and other agri-food products, Russia will instead focus on keeping itself fed, according to Medvedev, alongside supplying its friends and close allies. So he said that cutting off the likes of North America and the European Union from its agricultural produce would be a very good way of retaliating against sanctions imposed by the West. Quote, "It so happened that the food security of many countries depends on our supplies. It turns out that our food is our quiet weapon. Quiet, but ominous." This is absolutely the truth. There is no greater weapon than controlling the food. And if you look at so many wars that have been fought, a lot of these have been basically fighting over control of a food supply. Because as the saying goes, that we're always, at any given point, humanity is 9 meals away from anarchy. That's all it takes. If we go without food for 9 meals, 3 days, society will descend into chaos. And I have some examples of what's happening in Sri Lanka right now. He continues, "The priority in food supplies is our domestic market and price control." So basically what they're doing is they're cutting off all these exports of food to Western countries, and they're just saving it for themselves, right? So the whole world has been like, okay, we're going to cancel you, Russia. You're getting sanctioned, this, that, and the other. And like, okay, well, we're going to stop sending you our food and we're going to keep it for ourselves. Not bad, right? So what he says, though, we will supply food and crops to our friends. Fortunately, we have a lot of them, and they are not at all in Europe and not in North America. And for my fellow Americans here and those of you in Europe, I'm sorry, but we are not the friends of Russia. And you can thank our leaders for that. So this is going to affect us. He says that we will sell for both rubles and for the national currency in agreed proportions. We will not supply our products and agricultural products to our enemies. That's what he's saying. Now, this gets a little bit dicey because they're talking about what this means. So here we have an expert, a national expert who specializes in fertilizer, who says, for me, it's not whether we are moving into a global food crisis, it's how large the crisis will be. Okay, this person explains, half of the world's population gets food as a result of fertilizer. And if that's removed from the field or some crops, the yield will drop by 50%. So fertilizer comes from natural gas. Russia just happens to be the world's largest exporter of natural gas. If you haven't watched the show I did last Thursday, it was much more focused on the coming food crisis. I highly recommend you watch it because you have to, as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, knowledge is power. And right now, if you can see what's coming, you can prepare for it and protect yourself. Otherwise, you'll probably end up being caught in a bread line in a blue city where they're going to be forcing you into their digital passport and their central banking digital currency system, and what many would call their beast system. Okay, so here we see again, Breitbart London, Sweden harvests could halve due to lack of Russian fertilizers and more. This is significant. Okay, so what does this mean for groceries around the world? Okay, well, here's our Zero Hedge article, which this is actually, I think this was coming through the Epoch Times. German retailers to increase food prices by 20 to 50% on Monday. So this article right here was written yesterday. So as he says, Tyler Durden, just days after Germany reported its highest inflation in a generation, with February headline CPI soaring at 7.6% annual pace and blowing away all expectations, giving locals a distinctly unpleasant deja vu feeling even before the Russian invasion of Ukraine broke what few supply chains remained and sent prices even higher into the stratosphere. So right here, this is that graph I'm showing you is German hyperinflation. So for those of you that are listening on the podcast, just imagine there's a healthy looking line chart that goes vertical in the past year or so. And this is the inflation. So if you go back to World War I time, this is when they had the Weimar inflation. So this is back when basically in World War I, Germany borrowed a ton instead of taxing their citizens like France did, Germany just borrowed a bunch of money from other areas, other countries, and they basically destroyed the hyperinflation of their currency went through the roof. I mean, it was, I think, and I'll read about in the article, but up to 30,000% over the course of a day or two. So on Monday, continues, on Monday, Germany will take one step toward the return of the dreaded Weimar hyperinflation when, according to the German Retail Association, consumers should prepare for another wave of price hikes for everyday food or goods and groceries, with Reuters reporting that prices at German retail chains will explode between 20 and 50%. So think about this. A country like Germany, who just so happens to get around 50% of its natural gas from Russia. And even they come out and said they don't have a way to replace that. It'd probably take them at least 2 or 3 more years to wean themselves off of Russian natural gas. So they are sanctioning Russia. So Russia's hitting back, and Russia's basically turning off their gas, forcing to pay in rubles if they want it. But this is affecting Germany in a way. We already had hyperinflation really kicking in. But as of yesterday, food costs are going to be increasing 20 to 50%. Imagine that 50% increase in food costs. A lot of people, especially after 2 years of the pandemic, are already living paycheck to paycheck. If their food goes from, say $800 a month to $1,200 per month, this is crippling. So Russia, Putin, he knows what he's doing. So let me continue a little bit more in the article. We're talking about from Aldi, right? So I shop at Aldi occasionally. It's a major European retail brand. So they say that we will soon be able to see the impact of the war reflected in price labels across the supermarkets. Recently, popular retail chains such as Aldi, Edeka, and Globus announced they would be forced to raise their prices. At Aldi, meat and butter will be significantly more expensive from Monday due to price hikes from suppliers. Okay, so this is real. So what does this mean, though? When this happens, is it that people just eat less, or that they have to figure out how to make more money to pick up an extra job? Well, they're going to be struggling however they can. But ultimately, eventually, though, what happens when a population can no longer afford to eat is you have a societal breakdown. And as an example, I'll show you what's happening currently in Sri Lanka, because if you look, there are other nations that are being hit faster than us. So United States, in a lot of ways, we're at the top of the food chain. We're at the top of the totem pole. And so we're not going to have things that hit us until the very end. But if you want to understand what's going to happen in the United States, look to Europe. And if you want to understand what's going to happen to Europe, look to the Middle East, look to parts of Asia. You can see, because there's a domino effect that happens. As the first dominoes get knocked down, you're going to have places like Africa that get hit the worst. And you're going to have places like the Middle East or Asia. And then it's going to be Europe. And then it's going to be America. So I'm going to take a look at Sri Lanka with what's happening with the rising cost of living, the rising cost of food and fuel, et cetera. So let me pull up this article for you here. Another Breitbart article. So Sri Lanka, the cabinet resigns en masse after food and fuel shortages. So literally, almost the entire cabinet of the government in Sri Lanka has resigned because of protests over food and fuel shortages. This is coming to Europe, and this is coming to America. So let me read this to you. So almost all of the Sri Lankan government cabinet, apart from the nation's president and prime minister, resigned from their posts on Sunday amid Sri Lanka's worsening economic crisis. Okay, so I'm just going to go into the details here. So demonstrators, because the people have gotten fed up with it and they're demonstrating, they're fighting back against this. So demonstrators have gathered for weeks across Sri Lanka to denounce the role of the nation's government in Sri Lanka's spiraling financial crisis. Sri Lankans have suffered from severe food, fuel, and medicine shortages since at least early March, after the island nation essentially ran out of foreign currency reserves to pay for imported essential goods, right? So because the dollar is the reserve currency, a lot of countries actually hold the dollar and they use that dollar to purchase, because as a reserve currency, it's almost like it's like if you have the US dollar, you go to a lot of countries and the dollar still works for you. Like when I go over to Asia, I'm traveling, you can still use the US dollar in a lot of places, or it's very easy to exchange. So Sri Lanka ran out of its foreign reserve currency reserves, and so they were no longer able to purchase and import the essential goods for their own people. So here is a quote from Sky News saying that since the beginning of March, the Sri Lankan rupee has fallen by almost 45% against the US dollar, and its foreign exchange reserves have fallen to crisis levels. So this is what starts to happen, is you start to get mass protests, because when people, look, a lot of people were so excited that Biden got into office. Not me. They were so excited that, say, oh, look, I'll do anything to get Trump out. We hate Trump so much. But what happens, right? When people, you could say, okay, well, Biden's corrupt and he's helping China and all these different things. A lot of people are saying, who cares? I'm glad Trump is out. I hated his mean tweets and all this stuff. But what happens when gas is now $5 a gallon or $8 or $10 a gallon? What happens when beef, instead of being $6 a pound, is $8 a pound or $10 a pound? This is when it starts to affect the people. And there's a lot of people that will very quickly turn on the government, because ultimately so much of this is Biden's fault. Now, not to say that, look, this was a domino effect. So even if Trump would have gotten in for his second term properly, even if that would have played out, I still think he would have had a very, very hard time from stopping this, because this is a series of dominoes that was kicked off back in the early 1900s with the establishment of the Federal Reserve. In the 70s, when we got pulled off the gold standards, shipping all of our jobs over to China. You can thank Clinton and Obama and all of our great presidents before Trump for all the ways they set up America to fail. So even if Trump would have gotten in properly and he was sitting in the White House right now, properly in charge, well, for one, that he'd be struggling with the Senate and the Congress and all those people that are fighting to destroy our country. But he would have a really, really hard time reversing these things. I think that what would have happened is he would have delayed them, because this old system, it has to collapse. That's the process that we're in right now. So the next article I'm going to bring up for you is a very, very important one. And this is what is describing the big shift that's happening right now. So again, this is a zero hedge, but this article was originally from a guy named Ronan Manley. What a great last name. I wish my last name was Manley. Welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Manley. So anyway, he is from bullionstar.com. So what happened is, RT, right, which is Russia's state media, they asked this guy who really understands global finances and the gold markets and everything to write this Q&A up of what is happening, right? So as the headline there, a paradigm shift Western media hasn't grasped yet. Russian ruble relaunched, linked to gold and commodities. What is this going to do? So I'm going to read this. There's a little bit of reading here, a fair bit of reading for you. So just stick with it, because it's really, really important information. With Russia's central bank having just profoundly altered the international trade and monetary system by linking the Russian ruble to both gold and commodities, journalists in Moscow asked me to write a Q&A article on what these developments mean and the ramifications of these changes on the Russian ruble, the US dollar, the gold price, and the global system of currencies. Let me pause this ad playing that will distract you. Okay, so the article was published on the RT website. Now, since RT is blocked in a lot of areas, they published on Zero Hedge, so people can still get access to this article. Okay, so here he continues. Why is setting a fixed price for gold and rubles significant? So by offering to buy gold from Russian banks at a fixed price of 5,000 rubles per gram, the Bank of Russia has both linked the ruble to gold, and since gold trades in US dollars, set a floor price for the ruble in terms of the US dollar. So what Putin did is he has now basically officially backed his currency, the ruble, with gold, meaning that they are pegged. So what that means is that whether it's now or a year from now, you can take 5,000 rubles and you can purchase a gram of gold for those 5,000 rubles. They're now tied together. So if the gold price increases, which just about every expert you talk to predicts it will, the value of the rubles will get carried up with it. It's brilliant. It's the opposite effect of what the idiots in the United States did when they removed the US dollar from the gold standard. Which, which president was it? Do you know which president was trying to bring us back to a gold standard and take us back to a precious metal-backed currency? That was JFK. What happened to him for doing that? I don't know, same fate as Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, perhaps, these people that try to step across the boundary of the central banks. So he continues in this article here. We can see this linkage in action since Friday, the 25th of March, when the Bank of Russia made the fixed price announcement. The ruble was trading at around 100 to the US dollar at that time, but has since strengthened and is nearing 80 to the US dollar. Why? Because gold has been trading on international markers at about $62 per gram, which is equivalent to 5,000, which is equivalent to about 80.5. They're doing the calculation through the ruble. And markets and arbitrage traders have now taken note, driving the ruble USD exchange rate higher. So the ruble has a floor to the US dollar in terms of gold. What this means is that the ruble value won't drop below where the dollar is at, because the dollar has been artificially held. And so the ruble, now its value is tied to gold, and gold is done in US dollars. So it protects the ruble, it gives it a floor it cannot drop below. But gold also has a floor now, so to speak, because 5,000 rubles per gram is 155,500 rubles per troy ounce of gold. And with a ruble USD floor of around 80, that's a gold price of around 1940. So if the Western paper gold markets of LBMA and COMEX try to drive the US dollar gold price lower, they will have to try to weaken the ruble as well, or else the paper manipulations will be out in the open. So a lot of this goes back to the central banks. I'm talking on my own here, because the central banks have been using control over this to artificially hold down the prices of gold and silver, which in a lot of ways, it also holds up the value of the dollar. They have artificially held up the value of the US dollar because the US dollar has been their greatest weapon since really its inception, since the Federal Reserve was born. They've been printing, and using this money to loan out all around the world to fund their wars. The list goes on forever of what they've used with this. But now, by Russia pegging the ruble to gold and the gold being done in US dollars, he's actually exposing their manipulation of these markets. And so he's trapping them. He's trapping the central banks by pegging his currency to gold. It's really important. So additionally, with the new gold to ruble linkage, the article continues, if the ruble continues to strengthen, for example, due to demand created by obligatory energy payments in rubles, which is brilliant, there will also be reflected in a stronger gold price, because now Russia is now telling everybody, hey, if you want to buy my natural gas, you have to pay in rubles. So Germany, which gets half its natural gas from Russia, instead of paying in US dollars or say the German currency, they're now being forced to pay in rubles. So not only did Putin peg his ruble to gold, but he also is demanding payment for all of his commodities being done through the ruble, which strengthens the value of the ruble. So we're going to see an increase in gold coming from this, just from the basic mechanics of what he's doing here. So let's continue. So what does this mean for oil? So Russia is the world's largest natural gas exporter and the world's third largest oil exporter. We are seeing right now that Putin is demanding that foreign buyers, importers of Russian gas, must pay for this natural gas using rubles. This immediately links the price of natural gas to rubles, and because of the fixed link to gold, to the gold price. So Russian natural gas is now linked via the ruble to gold. Folks, this is exceptionally significant. The same can now be done with Russian oil. So if Russia begins to demand payment for oil exports with rubles, which we expect that he will, there will now be an immediate indirect peg to gold via the fixed ruble price, right? And the gold connection. So then Russia could begin accepting gold directly in payment for its oil exports. In fact, this can be applied to any commodities, not just oil and natural gas. Well, guess who's one of the largest exporters of wheat? Russia. Russia is actually undoing these central banks right now. This is what's playing out. This is significant. So what does this mean for the price of gold? By playing both sides of the equation, i.e. linking the ruble to gold and then linking energy payments to the ruble, the Bank of Russia and the Kremlin are fundamentally altering the entire working assumptions of the global trade system while accelerating change in the global monetary system. Let me read that to you real again. Russia, so the Bank of Russia and the Kremlin are fundamentally altering the entire working assumptions of the global trade system. This is significant. So continuing. So the linking of gold to energy payments is the main event. So he's saying here is that the fix between the ruble and gold is significant, but the linking of gold to energy payments is the main event. So while increased demand for rubles should continue to strengthen the ruble USD rate and show up as a higher gold price due to the fixed ruble, the gold linkage, if Russia begins to accept gold directly as payment for oil, this would be a new paradigm shift for the gold price, as it would link the oil price directly to the gold price. Remember, I read you at the beginning of this, I talked about how we're moving away from a finance-dominated system to a resource-dominated system. You see, gold is both a currency and a commodity. The US dollar is fake. It's a fake currency. It's a fiat currency. It's not real. It's a debt given to you, loaned out to you from the Federal Reserve. Gold is a real currency. So the entire control structure, and they outline this very specifically in the book Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, which is, came out of a Bilderberg meeting from the globalists. Their entire control structure of our world has been primarily through finance, through currency, which a lot of people you hear them talking about the central banks, the central banks, the central banks. This is how they've controlled us because they've created this fake currency. But what's happening with this is this currency is being replaced. Look, we could live in the world where you don't even use dollars, where you just trade in gold and silver. Imagine that. They wouldn't be able to control it. And this is why you're seeing them absolutely rush to bring in their central bank digital currency because they see the writing on the wall. Okay, so let me continue with this article. So for example, Russia could start specifying that it will now accept 1 gram of gold per barrel of oil. It doesn't have to be 1 gram, but would have to be discounted offer to the current crude benchmark. So as they promote uptake, as they promote take up, example, 1.2 grams per barrel. So buyers would then scramble to buy physical gold to pay for Russian oil exports, which in turn would create huge strains in the paper gold markets of London and New York, where the entire, quote, gold price discovery is based on synthetic and fractionally backed cash-settled unallocated gold and gold price derivatives. Basically, what this means is that he would unsettle the entire fake way that they're artificially controlling the price of gold and silver. That's what this could do. So what's it mean for the ruble? So if a majority of the international trading system begins accepting these rubles for commodity payment arrangements, this could propel the Russian ruble to becoming a major global currency. At the same time, any move by Russia to accept direct gold for oil payments will cause more international gold to flow into Russian reserves, which would also strengthen the balance sheet of the Bank of Russia and in turn strengthen the ruble. You have to give it to Putin. This is brilliant. But here's the question. What does this mean for other currencies? Because while it's easy for us to sit here and cheer on, of course we want to see the central banks collapse, the ramifications of this are significant, especially for those of us in America, the home of the Federal Reserve, the home of the fiat currency of all fiat currencies. Right here in America, folks, ladies and gentlemen, right here in America. So what does this mean? Well, he says, other non-Western governments and central banks will therefore be taking a keen interest in Russia linking the ruble to gold and linking commodity export payments to the ruble. In other words, if Russia begins to accept payment for oil in gold, then other countries may feel the need to follow suit, right? Especially countries like you'll explain here, like Iran, China, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. So look at who, apart from the US, are the world's largest oil and natural gas producers: Iran, China, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. Obviously, all of the BRICS countries and the Eurasian countries are also following this very closely. If the demise of the US dollar is nearing, all of these countries will want their currencies to be beneficiaries of a new multilateral monetary order. So what does this mean for the US dollar? Here's the question of the century. What does this mean for the US dollar? Since 1971, the global reserve status of the US dollar has been underpinned by oil. It's a petrodollar. And the petrodollar era has only been possible due to both the world's continued use of US dollars to trade oil and the USA's ability to prevent any competitor to the US dollar. But what we're seeing right now looks like the beginning of the end of that 50-year system. Remember, I think it was 71 that the US dollar got unchained from gold, unpinned from gold. So what we're seeing looks like the beginning of the end of that 50-year system and the birth of a new gold and commodity-backed multilateral monetary system. The freezing of Russia's foreign exchange reserves has been the trigger. Told you a lot of reading, but very, very important information, folks. Now, again, what I want to be digging into is what does this mean for the US dollar? Because, of course, we want to see the central banks fall. But if they fall, we will fall the hardest. Because look, the United States, the people of America, good, God-fearing people, the last 50 years we've experienced in a lot of ways, a beautiful way of life. We've had economic success. We've had all of our freedoms. We've had unlimited opportunity for upward mobility financially, the ability to have the American dream, the white picket fence, the home, etc. However, a lot of that has been fake. It's been fake because it's built on a fiat currency. America, in a lot of ways, modern America is a fiat country. Fiat, fake. Everything has been fake about us. Our celebrities are fake. Will Smith slapping up Chris Smith, it's fake. So much of the pandemic has been fake. There is so much fake in America, and actually all of the wealth and success that we've experienced has been tied to a dollar that's fake, that's been printed and printed and printed because it's been able to fund our wars. It's been able to create this whole system of control based upon the US dollar that is now approaching its collapse. And yes, Putin, as you mentioned in the article, that has been the trigger. But there's many things that have been happening leading up to this, but this is the trigger. This is the flick of the big domino that will quickly lead to the collapse of the US dollar. So let me pull up this. Okay, an article for you here. This is from Goldman Sachs. This article came out Friday. Goldman Sachs warns the dollar is at risk of losing its dominance and could end up a lesser player like the UK pound. So if you even have the banks, like the big organizations like Goldman Sachs, warning about the future of the dollar, this is something you should take seriously. And I see people asking about Bitcoin in the comments and people talking about cryptocurrency. I'll give you my 30-second position on crypto because I see a lot of you asking. I do not buy crypto. I do not recommend crypto. I don't trust anything that can disappear with the press of a button. And look, Klaus Schwab, they're already coming out talking about cyber attacks. What's a cyber attack do? Well, a cyber attack can bring down our power grid. If the power grid goes down, you can't pull out your iPhone and your Coinbase app and then go use your Bitcoin to buy rice from the local Amish farmer. It's not going to work like that. So look, I recommend if you want to use Bitcoin for international transactions, good. It's easy. I do not recommend cryptocurrency as a store of wealth. You might disagree with me, but look, I will recommend you what I do. I don't have a cent in crypto. Just don't trust it. What happens if there's a solar flare that goes off, or what happens if there's an EMP, whether it's a nuke EMP, or what happens if the power grid is hacked? There are so many things. Or what happens if because of a new social credit system that gets implemented, a digital tracking thing, that you're no longer allowed to even access digital wallets if your social credit score is not up to par. Or you might just say, look, you're now forced to use a central banking digital currency instead. So that's my position. I do not trust crypto. I don't recommend crypto. If you want to put your money into something, I recommend gold, silver, food, land, and supplies, water, etc., which we'll get into that in a little bit here. So back to Goldman Sachs, as they say. So Goldman Sachs has said the US dollar faces a number of risks and could become a lesser currency like the UK pound. The thing is that a lesser currency, that they're putting it really lightly, because if the dollar loses its dominance as the petrodollar and the world reserve currency, it doesn't mean it becomes a lesser currency. It means it collapses. It means that $1,000 is now worth $1. Like, it's significant. And so here Goldman Sachs is saying, though, that the U.S.'s tough sanctions on Russia have raised concerns that countries around the world could try to move away from the dollar. It's already happening. Goldman said that the U.S. foreign debts mean that foreign investors may become reluctant to hold dollar assets. So you can see the dominoes falling here. Now, you want to talk about inflation. I mentioned earlier how much they have been printing and printing and printing. And I think that if I remember correctly, Biden's budget for next year, I think he's going to be spending around $500 billion per month. So I think it's around almost a $6 trillion budget that he needs for next year. So look back at 2020, 2021. Why is the government just handing out all this money to us? Where does it all come from? They keep printing it. And this is something that happened under Trump, right? So this was happening under Trump. The Federal Reserve printed an insane amount of money. Well, how much, you ask? Well, let's go to this article right here. 80%, listen to this, 80% of US dollars in existence were printed in the last 22 months. Think about that. 80% of the US dollars in existence were printed in the last 22 months, from 4 trillion in January 2020 to 20 trillion in October 2021. All right. So as of February 2022, the US inflation hits a 40-year high, rising to 7.5% in 2021 as the Federal Reserve continues to print trillions out of thin air. The U.S. is now on the path of 1921 Weimar Germany. The Fed's addiction to money printing has kept the party going for Wall Street while fueling inequality. Today, the stock market and cryptocurrency are at record highs, while income and wages remain almost the same. The Federal Reserve continues to print more money, further devaluing the dollar and enslaving millions of Americans. To understand the magnitude of the Fed's money printing, we need to go back 22 months ago. At the start of 2020, there was $4 trillion in circulation. On January 4th, 2021, the number increased to 6.7 trillion. Then they went into overdrive. By October 2021, the number climbed to $20 trillion. At this, it continues, at the rate we're going, the Fed's addiction to printing led to further devaluation of the US dollar, since money printing doesn't necessarily increase productivity or economic output. What the Fed is doing now has been tried throughout history. The outcome is always the same. Take, for example, Germany. Between June 1921 and November 1923, the highest monthly inflation rate rose by over 30,000%. So within a month, over a 30,000% inflation rate. Zimbabwe is another country with hyperinflation. So if you've seen the old Zimbabwe banknotes, there's literally like a banknote for I think it's like $100 trillion. It's like a dollar bill. It's a banknote that has $100 trillion on it. And that may have bought you, a bushel of corn or a gallon of water or a gallon of fuel. That's what the hyperinflation looks like. And this is ignoring everything we just went over. This is ignoring what happens if the United States gets kicked off being the reserve currency or is no longer the petrodollar. I'm just looking at the inflation and the hyperinflation that comes from printing, going from $4 trillion in currency to over $20 trillion in currency. Okay? Now, There's something that I'm going to share with you that, and there's an article I'm going to bring up. Now, this came from, it's on a different website. This came from Mike Adams. And Mike Adams has been someone that is very spot on with a lot of this. And he's someone I recommend watching, listening to, reading. His website is Health Ranger. I think it's healthranger.com. Oh, no, Natural News. Naturalnews.com is his main website. And so something that he's talked about is called Project Sandman. Now, it's not an easy thing to research, and I want to spend more time researching it, but keep this in mind and take this with a grain of salt because I'm still doing my research on it, but this is something that he's talked about, and I usually trust Mike Adams when it comes to these things. But this is something called Project Sandman, which is quite alarming, but it also makes sense because what he's going to be talking about here is over 100 countries that have agreed to drop the dollar all at once. Meaning that, look, right now in America, we think that we're this great country, we're the international police. Think about Germany in the 1940s. Think about how people viewed Germany after the war when they realized the atrocities that the German government committed and some of the people of Germany. What was happening now? A lot of people in that, say, over the next couple of years are going to be looking at America as a Germany. They're going to be looking at America and saying, look, you funded all these biolabs, you funded all these wars. It was your fiat currency that has caused a global collapse of the currency systems. It was your leader in the White House, your Biden, that destroyed so much of what we've seen, that helped perpetuate the global food shortages and everything. So I hate to break it to Americans, but while we're used to being the great country, the great nation, the American empire is nearing its end. And it's a hard statement to even say, but the American empire as we know it is a fiat empire built on a fiat currency. And it's nearing its end. Now, I believe that as it falls, something better will emerge from it, because I believe that when it falls, all these evil systems will fall with it. Everything that's fake will be destroyed, and what's real will sustain itself. But don't expect a lot of help from other countries amidst this process, because unfortunately, it's our leaders, the leaders that we have allowed to get into office, that some of us voted into office. I know they've got their ways of rigging things, which I can't talk about because I'm on YouTube and Facebook, but still, we've allowed so much of this to happen. You can go back to the Clintons and the Bushes. Look what they did. Look at Obama. Look what they did. So I'll pull up this article about Project Sandman. Now, again, as I mentioned, take this with a grain of salt, but I think there's a lot of validity to this. So what it says, this is an article that was republished from naturalnews.com, which says 100 plus nations have global agreement now being deployed called Project Sandman to drop and end dominance of the US dollar and petrodollar. So Project Sandman describes a 100 plus nation agreement that when triggered will see those nations simultaneously drop the dollar and abandon the petrodollar status that has allowed the USA to enjoy 50 years of fiat currency counterfeiting and material abundance at the expense of everyone else. Now, this article also does a very, very good job of explaining how this has played out and explaining the United States' position and how we've been used by the central banks and how the central banks have used the dollar to control the world and basically rape and pillage the world through the fiat printing. Okay, so when this decision is triggered, the dollar and all dollar-denominated assets will plunge to near zero literally overnight. Now, this is, Mike Adams, it doesn't really hold back on things that can cause a lot of fear. So I don't want this to be too much of a fear-mongering article, but there's some really important principles right here. And if anything, it should help you understand how fragile the dollar system is, and it should really make you rethink about putting your money into different things, such as gold and silver, land, etc. So this means all dollar-denominated bank accounts, bonds, pension funds, treasuries, and other investment vehicles will essentially be worth zero for the simple reason that all banks and markets will freeze operations. He says, this is the James Rickards ICE 9 scenario. Any funds you have in the stock market will be stuck in those markets, and the entire infrastructure of banking and finance will suffer a catastrophic liquidity crisis that will freeze nearly all financial transactions. Credit cards will stop functioning. Food stamp systems will go down and stay down. ATMs will not function. Wire transfers will be halted. Checks won't be honored, and banks will appear to be offline when accessed through the internet, displaying maintenance messages to panicked users. The dollar collapse is a deliberate plan to force the starving masses into a digital dollar control grid, which I've talked about this a lot. And this is one of the important things to understand here is that the globalists, the elite, and I think the CCP is hand in hand with this too, because they want this system for control to control themselves as well. They want this to collapse. They want our global currency system to implode so they can bring in their central bank digital currency. Now, the problem is for them, this is not going to work. Some people, the people that haven't prepared, the people that still buy into everything that are on their 16th booster, it'll probably work for them. They're going to be lining up in cities, in the blue cities, getting their jab along with their bread, and they're going to get their universal basic income. Okay, but I think that a lot of this, because Putin accelerated this, it's like that the tower is going to collapse, and the enemy is controlling that demolition specifically so they can have the outcome they want on the other end of it. Whereas Putin's like, I'm going to flick out the bottom 2 floors of that tower, cause the whole thing to collapse, because I don't think you're going to maintain control amidst it, which is what I believe is happening. So listen to this. He says, this scenario has been engineered for a deliberate collapse of the dollar fiat currency and an attempted forcing of everyone into a digital dollar system run by the banksters. In the midst of the panic, people will be promised a universal basic income, which is so true. It's what they're going to do. It's what they're already doing in Ukraine. And food credits, food rationing will be strictly enforced, but only if they use the approved digital wallet system run by the very same criminals who spent the last 50 years looting the value of the dollar. Desperate people will comply. They'll sell their souls and their freedom in exchange for a few more meals, even while their futures are obliterated by the mark of the beast financial system that will forever keep them enslaved and impoverished. And he says, the illegitimate occupying government of America is currently pumping out trillions of dollars in fiat currency as its final desperate act to loot the system before its final collapse. You didn't think that the billions in aid to Ukraine was actually going to Ukraine, did you? Which is what they're doing. They are stomping on the gas pedal to increase printing, requesting trillions and trillions of dollars, sending money to Ukraine. They are extracting as much wealth from the system as they can before they collapse it. War with Russia is just a cover story, this engineered collapse and long-planned takedown of America while the traders at the top, Biden, et cetera, fill their bank accounts with stolen loot. When the petrodollar collapses and the banks freeze, riots will begin almost immediately in every major U.S. city. Total chaos will reign as the desperate, oblivious, unprepared masses murder each other while attempting to find food, water, and ammunition. The collapse of the rule of law will be shockingly rapid, and no police or National Guard units will make a dent in the nationwide chaos. Only the rural areas will be safe as local citizens and law enforcement work together to protect local communities from wave after wave of refugees and violent gangs that will spread out from the cities. So I'm not going to kind of continue on to what he says there because it's pretty harsh, but I wanted to share it with you just to paint the picture. I don't think it'll necessarily be as bad as that, but this is why I've continually talked to you about preparing, prepping, learning how to grow your own food, learning how to raise farm animals. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to pick up 12 more chickens. That'll be an extra, 10 eggs every day that I'll have that I can preserve to feed my family and to feed, I got little dogs now too to protect us from foxes. So this is serious. And look, if you are in a blue city, I highly, highly recommend, even if you're in a city in general, try to get out to the country, try your best, or at least get to know people that are out there. But one of the big questions I've been asking people are asking about this is saying, okay, if this happens, what does it mean for us? Well, I think that as Mike Adams mentioned, that pretty quickly you'll see a significant change in the overall social fabric of our society that will very fastly unravel. But what does it mean for debt? So I found an article I want to share with you here because a lot of people have asked, well, what happens to our debts? Right? Say you have a mortgage on your house or you have a credit card debt. What happens if the dollar collapses and you still have that debt? I actually found a really helpful article I want to share with you because it's actually somewhat encouraging. As crazy as things are, it's like, oh, bad news after bad news. And there are some encouraging things. But I think the most important, I'll make a point here. To me, the most encouraging thing about all this is while it will be very difficult, we're getting rid of the system. We're getting rid of the evil system our world has been built on. And I know it's going to be tough, but once we get through this, I know that you're going to survive and your family's going to survive because you're smart and you're prepping and you have spiritual discernment and you have faith. Once you get through this, you're going to look back and say, oh my gosh, I never will go through that again. I will never, ever question the blessings that we have, because when you look back, you're going to say, you know what? That was worth it. That was so worth it, even though that time period was very difficult. You'll realize what you've gotten rid of. And that's the blessing, is that right now we see this evil. I think that's one of the ways that God is blessing us, is he's allowing us to see the evil and to have discernment and foresight so we can prepare ourselves for this, because it's significant. And people are asking, one of their questions see floating around is timelines. Now, look, I don't like speaking too much about timelines because things change, but my best guess is that I think that we have another 6 months to a year to really stabilize and prepare. But I think that after we get to, say, 1 to 3 years, that's where we're going to really see these systems start to collapse. And look, even if Trump gets back in properly in 2024, or even before that, he can maybe slow this down, but you cannot stop this. This is a freight train that left the station 100 years ago, and there's no way to stop it. And I know some people were like, oh, there's Nasara and Jasara. Unfortunately, I don't believe it. I'm sorry. I think that if you have these grand ideas of someone coming in on a white horse and saving you and redistributing the wealth of the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and it's not going to happen. I'm sorry. And if it does, I'd love to be wrong. But prepare. So let me go talk about, to end today's show, before I head over to RiseTV only for the Q&A, I have one more article to share with you, which is what happens to debt when the dollar collapses. And then, like I said, after I finish this, we'll go over to RiseTV. As I mentioned at the beginning, RiseTV is literally the reason why I can do this full time. Not just me, my wife, and me, other people. We're really dedicating a lot of energy and effort into what we're doing with RiseTV. So if you want to support, as you can see, I'm now on YouTube and Rumble and Facebook for free. I will continue to put as much information out as possible to the public, because this is important information I want to get out. But if you want to support that and join RiseTV, it's $9.99 a month. And that's where I have the Q&A at the end of every show. So you can ask me questions. You can say, hey, Seth, how many chickens do you recommend? Or, hey, Seth, do you recommend buying a silver in 10-ounce bars or in 1-ounce coins? You can ask me questions. We have Q&A. You'll meet a lot of amazing patriots as well that are part of RiseTV. And as I mentioned, there is a link in the description for a free trial, so you can check it out. But if you can't, I know that things are tight right now with gas prices and everything. I'm still here for you. And I will be here for you as much as possible. I will be here for you through whatever we have ahead of us. Unless EMP hits and we lose all electricity, maybe I'll be sending you a newspaper then at that point. I don't know. So after this article, we'll head over to RiseTV. I hope to see you there. So to finalize the public portion is, what happens to debt when the dollar collapses? A really important question I think we should all be concerned about. So this is from Sapling, which is a financial advice website. A collapse of the dollar would not be a good thing for the U.S. economy. Yes, of course. Or the world, but there might be a bit of silver lining for people who owe money. Debt wouldn't be eliminated by a dollar collapse, but repaying it would get a lot easier. That's because when a dollar loses nearly all its value, then $100 or $1,000 or $100,000 isn't worth much either. So what does a collapse mean? When economists talk about a currency such as the dollar collapsing, they're referring to a sudden steep decline in the value of that currency to the point where it's worth only a tiny fraction of its previous value. For people using the currency, the collapse manifests in hyperinflation, extreme price increases. Whereas today, an apple might cost $1, next week it might cost $10. The week after that, $20. It's not that the apple has gotten more valuable, it's that the dollar has gotten less valuable. So today, $1 pays for a whole apple, next week, maybe a couple bites worth. So this is an important concept here, is the wage price spirals. So currency collapses have produced astounding images of people using stacks of money for the smallest purchases, and of governments printing banknotes in ridiculously high denominations. It's hilarious, such as the $100 trillion bill that Zimbabwe printed in the 2000s. Which, according to the Wall Street Journal, still wouldn't even pay for local bus fare. So in Zimbabwe, you could have a $100 trillion bill that couldn't even buy you a trip on the bus. Okay, so during a currency collapse, hyperinflation locks an economy into what they call a wage price spiral, in which high prices force employers to pay higher wages, which they pass on to customers as higher prices and cycle continues. Meanwhile, the government cranks out currency to meet demand, making inflation even worse. The spiral can make it impossible for anyone to keep up with inflation, but it does have one benefit for debtors. It makes it easier to pay off debt. A silver lining. So imagine you had a mortgage with $100,000 left on it and your income was 50 grand a year. Now the dollar collapses, hyperinflation results, and the wage price spiral pushes your income to say $1 million a year. This represents roughly a 2,000% inflation, which is relatively modest as far as currency collapses go. In Zimbabwe, the annual inflation rate in 2008 was 231 million%. But your mortgage is still only 100,000 because hyperinflation doesn't change debt balances. Okay, hyperinflation doesn't change debt balances. So hyperinflation is a massive loss of value. So the currency collapsing is equivalent to hyperinflation, but it doesn't change. The bank can't say, well, because of hyperinflation, instead of 100,000, you owe us $1 million. No, that value, that debt stays the same. So what he's saying is that before the collapse, it would have taken 2 years worth of wages to pay off your mortgage. Now it takes less than a month. In general, inflation is good for debtors since it reduces the real value of what they owe, and bad for savers since it reduces the real value of their savings. The hyperinflation from a collapse of the dollar would intensify these effects. Now, here's an important point. It's bad for savers if you're saving in the US dollar. So if your savings is, say you have an IRA with $100,000 in it, that's 100,000 US dollars. So if the currency loses its value by, say, 100 times, that $100,000 is now only worth $1,000. If your savings is in gold or silver, traditionally when there's hyperinflation, especially what you see happening with the ruble, you're going to see gold and silver prices increase. So that's why it's, as a store of wealth, gold and silver are a very safe place to go. Or say you took $100,000 and you bought $100,000 worth of grain, hypothetically. Well, that grain after hyperinflation might be worth in 2 months $1 million. So your value increases with that. It's the value of the US dollar that decreases, not the value of the commodities. The one downside, though, of this hyperinflation is that it's been very tough to have lending. He says if the dollar collapses and runaway inflation results, it might get easier to pay off existing debt, but it's also going to be extremely difficult and costly to engage in any new borrowing. Inflation benefits borrowers at the expense of lenders, which, to be honest, I don't mind if we're taking advantage of the lenders, these big corrupt banking systems. Just my own personal opinion there. So in times of high inflation, lenders charge high interest rates to try to stay ahead of the dwindling value of money they've lent out. Amid hyperinflation, if they're willing to make loans at all, lenders will be expected to set astronomical interest rates, and they might not be willing in any case. So amid hyperinflation, money can lose its value so fast, the only rational thing to do is spend it to turn it into something of value rather than lend it. So I thought that was a really good way of finishing up today's episode. I hope this was a fantastic learning opportunity for you. Though I think that we have some very difficult times ahead of us, you can see that the difficulty comes from us shedding this old system, shedding this corrupt system. And look, they are going, as Mike Adams mentioned, they're going to try to use this as an opportunity to force you into their system. Because when you can't produce your own food, you have to then go to the bread lines. Then you're going to be forced to get the vaccine passport to show you got your 16th booster. This is how they want to force you into the social credit system. So, okay, they're going to say, look, hyperinflation is so bad. The US dollar is done for. So, we're going to give you a universal basic income. Do not take the universal basic income because that comes, the government doesn't give you money for free. It comes at a cost. And it may just come at the cost of your soul because that's what they're using this for, is to have complete control over humanity. So folks, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to now be heading over just to RiseTV to have a discussion over there with the Rise folks. We'll do Q&A. You can ask me questions about anything and everything, whether it's prepping, chickens, my opinion on Durham or Elon Musk or Trump or devolution. We'll talk about all this stuff over there. So if you want to come over and join us on Rise TV, in the description below the video, there's a link. You can get a free trial. You can come check it out. I hope you stay and love it. I think you will. But if you can't, I understand. As I said, I will continue to make a lot of free content for you. If you want to support, you can do that by helping share this content. You can share it with a friend or family member. Even if you have people that are saying, look, I think Putin's bad and evil, show them this video. I'm not coming in here praising Putin for saving, Ukraine from the Nazis. That's not the purpose of this video. I'm showing you what's happening on a more global level. And when you look at it from this, you might be thinking, you know what, Putin's got a lot more behind what he's doing than the mainstream media is making it look like. So, all right. So folks, thank you so much for joining us. And look, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, at least go watch on Rumble and subscribe on Rumble, where they're not censoring like Facebook and YouTube are. That's one thing. So, all right. Thank you folks for joining me today. And I will see you over at Rise TV. All right. So Dom, you can go ahead and cut the streams to the other channels, and we're going to go over just to Rise specifically here. Now, give me a second. I just got to pull up the questions. So as usual, folks, on Rise, two things. One, if you have a question, just write all caps question. And two, if you just joined Rise TV, if this is your first time on here, please let me know. Say, hey, Seth, I just joined to check it out. I would love to say hello to you. If you have a little shout out you want me to give, I would be happy to, because I really appreciate you. And honestly, all of you that are on Rise TV, you are the reason why we can do this.